Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm very excited about this new face on the program, but somebody I'm very excited to talk to. He is the editor-in-chief of The Voice down in Atlanta. He's going to tell you all about that in just a minute. Donnell Suggs, how are you, sir?
Good morning, brother. I'm fine. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I love having you. This is one of the reasons I do social media. I get to meet new people, and now I've got an excuse to talk to them. So great to talk to you. Let's start big picture for a second, because I had something happen back when we were covering the midterms. I was talking to one of our regular election folks that does the data and stuff. I think politically, culturally, demographically, economically, any of those major narrative stories that we're covering nationally, and of course those show up at election time, I find Atlanta to just be one of the real fascinating places to watch in the country. I'm an outsider, you're an insider, you're there, you right there. Does it feel that way to you folks, that you really do have a microcosm of a lot of the wider issues going on, and we got them all right there in Atlanta right now?
You're spot on. I think what's special about Atlanta is it really isn't Georgia. What Atlanta is the best of what America can be with the ethnicities and different cultures, and also sort of kind of what happens when a city grows so fast that it has to just kind of be in the spotlight, even if it doesn't want to be. I always tell people Atlanta and Georgia are two different things. Atlanta's the capital city, but it's like nothing else in Georgia. So politically, it's like nothing else in Georgia, and now it feels like it's like nothing else in America, and that's really special. That's really special to be a part of that right at this time.
Yeah, and your own story fits directly into that. You're actually a Brooklyn guy.
Yes,
You've been
sir.
there for quite a while now, so no shame in saying you're an Atlanta original native, whatever you want to call it. But
Mm.
you're one of them. Take your own story, walk people through that. You came to Atlanta, you're part of that story. You came into that community, you're raising your family there now. What got you there, and what makes you stay there and work?
16 years in Atlanta, 17 years this June. Met my wife here. My son was born here. My newspaper career really blossomed here. I moved here with the opportunity to work for a lot of smaller black newspapers because Atlanta still had those. Whereas in New York, there might be a few, but it was just harder to break into the industry as a young man without a ton of references outside of college newspapers. So Atlanta gave me my start. And in the meantime, in 2006, the Atlanta continues to change. So I'm kind of going along for that ride. And I just think that Georgia as a whole, but Atlanta in particular, is that story for a lot of people. They moved here from Detroit and Chicago and Philly, et cetera, New York, of course, New Jersey. And we got to start in maybe a different industry, or we got a fresh start in the industry that we love. In Atlanta, at least at that time, because it wasn't as crazy as it is now, as far as 8 million people. When I got here, it might have been like five. And it was still like, oh, people were saying, where you going? Atlanta. Okay, why? And now it's like, oh, where you going? Atlanta. Oh, okay, of course. And that's the change. So I think my story is very similar to a lot of people. That is just a place where you can get a fresh start or get the start you were looking for. And that's definitely what happened to me.
Yeah, Donnell Suggs, he's the editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. You just mentioned it. You got your start in newspapers and writing. We've been talking a lot, and we covered on our show, and when we have reporters on, I always talk to them. We really, it is a big thing in our country, this dynamic, the nationalization of media. Even though Atlanta is a major city, there's still local reporting that's really, really important. We just saw this with the Santos story in New York. Local paper had it, national media ignored it. There's lots of examples of this. Even in a major metro like Atlanta, one of our fastest growing, biggest metro, the diversity of it, the size of it, the way it's growing, the politics of it that we've seen in the last couple elections, local media, even in a big city like that, really, really matters still, doesn't it?
It does. It does. You're not going to get the stories about local politicians. You're not going to get the stories about city council. You're not going to get the stories about the school districts from a national media standpoint unless something major happens, i.e., Herschel Walker, Senator Reverend Warren. When they got down to the nitty gritty, then of course, by the time they debate in Savannah, I'm elbow to elbow with CBS, CNN, ABC, and Fox News. I didn't see any of those people on the campaign trail in the early going when he first announced it, which I get it. I get it. It's not a national story yet. Then once it becomes one, now I'm like in a scrum with like Fox News, and it's great for me. It's great. I know local people don't like to have the nationals kind of come in and bombard, but because we were on board from day one, I'm treated just like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal when there's a scrum. As a matter of fact, maybe even better in some cases in regards to Warnock's campaign because they saw me when he was doing church parking lots on the west side of Atlanta with like 25 people outside. So when there's 25,000 people in College Park and President Obama's coming, they still see me. So local news is very important because we have the relationships that form when it isn't the coolest story in America. So when it becomes the coolest story in America, we're still there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because this is why the just banging on the media, and I've tried to quit saying media. I try to distinguish news media, broadcast media. Those are very different things. You
Social
just
media.
mentioned these are still people and these are still relationships, even though it's a big business. So yeah, you need to build that relationship with a CBS News, a Fox News, and MSNBC, whoever the big national carriers is. They're like, oh, well, we know we can go to this guy and get good information. We can go to this outlet or we can go to this specific reporter. People can do that with their social media, though, too, even if they're other parts of the country. Start following specific reporters, specific outlets. That's actually how you start making media better instead of just bashing the nameless, faceless, the media, right?
Please, I think it's great that we separate media, which is a form of communication, from journalist, which is a professional person that knows how to deliver a message. Just like I can sing, but it's not well. I don't want to call myself a singer just because I sang a song in the shower this morning. You shouldn't call yourself a journalist if you're just out there writing something down on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. So that's okay, but that's a form of media. Just like my singing is a form of noise. That's a form of media, and that's okay. So I think the locals are, our jobs are so much more important now because there's so many people who can get a message out. It might not necessarily be a good one or even true. So you need to have that local media there, that source that you can trust and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm just going to check AtlantaVoice.com, or I'm going to check Donnell's Twitter feed because he's usually involved in that stuff. And that's happened a bunch of times, especially during the campaign.
Yeah, Donnell Suggs, he's the editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. Let's talk about the Voice for a second because there's a long history of specific newspapers in America. And of course, newspapers are now more digital-minded, so it turns out Black newspapers, other ethnic groups had their own newspapers. This is a long tradition that kind of sort of dropped off in the last few years, but there's folks like you. I know in my home state, even as non-racially diverse as West Virginia can be, we have Black by God, things like this. There seems to be a movement back towards this, using the new technology with the old ideas. Why is it so important for these people groups, whether it's a Black group or whatever, to have their own voice in their own media? Because like we talked with local media, there's some stories that you can just cover that way that nobody else can.
And I think you just said it best. Not that a white reporter from the New York Times couldn't come to Atlanta and tell a story about a lady with a flower shop in College Park, Georgia. Not saying that he or she couldn't do that, but would they do that? I think local media in West Virginia, Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Tribune, for example, one of my favorite Black newspapers, Amsterdam News, one of my favorite Black newspapers in Atlanta, in New York, the Atlanta Voice, etc. I think we have a beat on some of that more ground level stuff that you still need. And in the case of websites like Word in Black, there are websites that are saying, hey, listen, let's get these Black newspapers together. Let's get online. Let's make a digital front and get the word out still, because I think it's still important that we tell our own stories still. We were doing that in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s because we couldn't get into mainstream media. And then once we began to do that, just like in college and sports as well, well, then maybe I don't need to write for the Atlanta Voice. I can write for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And there are some great journalists there. I don't care what color they are. But in the same token, I'm at a Clayton County school talking to someone at a warming station in Jonesboro that no one else would care about because it's not on their beat. Whereas with me, it's more local, so I better get down there. And then you end up being able to tell really good stories. So I feel like the push towards Black journalism, I think it's a real thing. And even though I just came from a major newspaper. The Atlanta Business Chronicle is a major news. It's the second largest paper in the state of Georgia. And I feel like it's the most important because we talk about development and business. I was there. When an opportunity came to run the Black newspaper in town, I jumped at it because I felt like it was important to be able to continue to tell our stories.
Yeah, Donnell Suggs, editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. Let's take an example that you already mentioned. Senator Warnock, now senator. I'm an outsider. I'm a national guy. So I'm basically going off what I read and talking to people. And when I talk to people about the last runoff, and it ran into this runoff with Senator Warnock, that first runoff race, there was the national narrative, and then the Trump jumped in, and then there was the complete disaster piece of the GOP and how they handled that and telling their own voters not to vote and all that. That was the national narrative. But when I talked to people locally and I started talking to sources like what you folks do, they're like, no, no, no. There's a story with the Raphael Warnock, the church stuff, some of the really ugly stuff, that how personal that race got. And it carried over because it was only 2 years until the next one. That was the local story that the national kind of missed. And that is one of those great examples of, like, politically, everybody's like, well, how did you see this coming? Well, because if you talk to the local people, the story was completely different than the national narrative that came in later. And now you got to, now on his own terms, Senator Warnock.
Again, we were covering Warnock when the idea was just floated about him 2 years ago, potentially running for Senate. So this wasn't new stuff for us. We were covering Ebenezer Baptist Church whenever they had MLK different celebrations, etc. So again, he was familiar to us. So when we jumped into this thing, it wasn't like we were talking about someone that we had to kind of discover. We knew him already, and it just read differently. It doesn't have to read better. It just read differently because I was already covering his church, or I was already talking to parishioners at his church. So it wasn't like we parachuted in and tried to figure out this guy. We knew this guy, and I think that's the strength of being the only Black newspaper, the only Black print and online newspaper in Atlanta. We still have that cachet with a lot of these people, especially particularly a reverend at the most prominent church in the city. I think in the city, period, let alone Black church. So that comes with being local and already being on the ground.
And that's a culture thing, Black church. Man, even if you come from a church background, that's unique in and of itself. It really needs to explain to folks that don't understand it, because it was really one of those things with, and this is the best way I can think to explain it. You can explain it better than me. Is like, look, this is one of those things that's in sort of like, we talk amongst ourselves about certain things, but you don't get to criticize it from the outside. It was that kind of a dynamic, but a national audience may not be familiar with, especially Southern church culture in that community.
The Black church was the place where we could go, kind of like how guys talk at the barbershop now. Let's take it back to when we couldn't drink out of that water fountain or sit at that lunch counter. But the Black church was the place where you can go, quote unquote, let your hair down and have our conversations about how things are going to go. And in some cases, during the civil rights movement, have our conversations about what we're going to do. So the Black church has a certain cachet and prominence still to this day. That's a place where we can be ourselves, and you don't have to necessarily mix words or keep some things under wraps. These days now you get canceled for everything. Well, I've been to Black churches where folks is talking about how we're raising our kids, why we don't have jobs, how you're dealing with your wife, and it's like, this is your father, your mother, in a sense, your pastor telling you this is how you're supposed to do it. You ain't doing it right, and that's why Black church is still extremely important.
Yeah, Donnell Suggs joining us, editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. We're going to link to it, by the way, so you can find his publication and the great work. He's got some really good young reporters. I was reading through this stuff. The key to the First Amendment, when we talk about freedom of speech, is, do you tolerate somebody that's against your speech? Do you defend their right to say something you disagree with? It's kind of the same thing with the press. We need to have an adversarial press because there's a lot of accountability that needs to go away, and everybody covers things a little differently. It's almost like the old Jordan thing, Republicans buy shoes too, right? If you're on the right, you should be protective of progressive press. Progressive press should be protective of conservative press. This thing all goes together. How do we get past that so that we're talking about journalism? Because it really does seem like it's gotten more and more partisan, and there's nothing wrong with that. But overarching that is, I think there's been some taking advantage of the freedom of the press under the guise of that, and we're missing the bigger picture. Like, no, we need all of this media working, even if they're at cross purposes sometimes, because when it comes to things like government or corruption or big corporations or demographic changes or whatever, the press is still supposed to be that outlet between the people and those halls of power. How do we tell that story a little bit better in a bigger picture way? So, like, hey, even if I disagree with this publication, it's important that they're there.
I'm gonna use this moment to take a shot at television and radio. I think they're more bipartisan than we are in the printed press, because we can't be, unless you're literally like telling you, advertising yourself as a right wing this or right wing that. For the most part, we're reporters, and we're going to ask questions of people, and we're going to report it. I think television, and particularly television, and then radio are like, wait a minute, we need these audiences, so we better go down this lane. Fox News has phenomenal journalists there, but they have a job and they have bosses that make them say some of the things they say. Tucker Carlson's a really good journalist. I don't think a lot of people know he's an excellent reporter. But no one cares anymore because on TV, he's saying these things that make you say, oh, either I love this guy or I hate this guy. And he's got to do what he has to do to feed his family. I get that. I wish he wouldn't and be a little more careful. With that said, I think as me as a newspaper reporter and someone that writes for a printed paper and online, I have to just be gray. Here's what happened. I was at Walker rallies. I was at Warnock rallies, for example. It wasn't like I was telling some more than the others. And I think that's the difference between those two mediums, those three mediums. And I think we should get back to having all three mediums, radio, TV, and print, just be journalists and not necessarily have any sides. When did that happen? We didn't used to have that.
But, this is grown folk talk that we do here. We don't yell, we talk through things. You're in a business, you run the paper, you're an editor-in-chief. You understand that digital side is now the lifeblood of print media. I mean, you just got to be or you're dead, because we've seen it all across the country. How do you transfer that to the new technology without changing the principles of it? Because that's what the print media, again, let's break this down. Broadcast media, that's a whole different business model than journalism, than investigative journalism, than print media. How does print media push ahead? Because you're doing it. This is your job now. You try to take print media and investigative reporting and put it in a digital context. How do you see it as somebody that's doing it and trying to evolve with it as it's changing under your feet?
And you mentioned earlier, I have some really good young journalists. When you say young, they're like 24 and 21 in particular. They're kids. And their mindset is get in front of a camera or get on social media or try to write a hot take. And I'm training them to say, listen, you can have a hot story and have it still be journalism. Let's utilize social media. Let's get on Twitter and let's utilize that to say, hey, we're here at this place. There's still a way for me to do it. The website is the lifeblood. It's just bottom line. The ads online make us more money than ads in print. People still want that. But I have to be clear, all the stories have to be for online. So there's a balance. But I think there's a way for us to do that and still be on social media as well, because that's a way to get to. So I meet so many more people on Twitter than I do in real life. Yourself included. I have all these friends that wish me happy birthday and happy anniversary. And you're like, man, I'm never going to see this guy. I'm never going to see this girl. But we're all friends because of social media. And that's a way we can do our journalism as well. We just got to be really careful with making sure it's journalism and not just putting something online because some certain company wants to pay this much money for an ad. We get that all the time. We're the black newspaper in town. A lot of companies want to reach black audiences, or at least pretend that they are. And they'll come to us and say, hey, here's this big, I'm not going to name a company, here's this big ad or whatever. Could you put that by a story about this? And sometimes I have to push back with my publishers and say, wait. That's fine. Put the ad there, but we're going to write the story like we would have wrote the story without the ad. So there's a balance, but it's been fun because, again, now I have a chance to shape the news a little bit instead of just being a reporter. So it's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, though.
Yeah, Donnell Suggs, editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. Let's throw some good news in that mix, though, because some of this has been a little heavy. One thing I find interesting with the younger journalists coming up, younger commentators that I get to work with and do some mentoring with them, one of the things I really like to do is this stuff is their natural ecosystem, though. So I think there's going to be some innovation in this because you don't have to train them to do TikTok. You don't have to train them to multi-platform. They just naturally do it. They already know, they brand themselves. You don't have to teach them brand, our age group, we talked about networking back in the day, right? You don't have to tell them that. They do it naturally. It's their natural language. Some of this, I think, is just going to kind of fix itself because I think this upcoming generation that's already technologically savvy, if you can do what you just said about mentoring them, They already got the rest of it. I think we're actually on the brink of seeing some real innovation in how things like media and journalism are done, just because this group of people are going to do it in a way that's never been done before.
The business has changed. The business has changed. Now you have publications that you don't need a print press. You don't need an office. There's some that don't even have an office. It's just like we all get on Google Meet and we'll have our staff meeting, and then boom, guys or girls are out covering stories, national stories, local stories. So the business will change, and thankfully, these young people, I call them kids sometimes. I'm 45. I call them a kid. If you're 21, I could be your dad, and it's like that's amazing because I was always the kid in the newsroom. I was always up until my last job. I was one of the youngest reporters there, and now it's like 45 is the old guy, which is great because I still have those things where I say, "Wait a minute, go back and ask that one more question," or I know they're zooming the press conference, but it's right downtown. Go ahead and go to that. You still need guys like us to say, go to the press conference. I know it's on Zoom, or I know they're going to have it on whatever, but go down there and check it out. So these kids are coming with a ton of talent and a ton of technological skill, but there's still room for ask another question, call them back, go visit that said business or that said politician. So the business is changing for sure, but some of our old tenants, they still matter.
Yeah. Donnell Suggs, he's the editor-in-chief of the Atlanta Voice. Okay, we talked about parachuting. For folks that want to work on that, now that the elections are done, people will leave Georgia alone for at least, 12 months or so until we do the next batch of elections. It's going to be a very important state in 2024. Let's not kid ourselves. But locally, what's a couple of the big picture stories over the next year or two are you looking at Atlanta that the national audience or international audience should not, they're not going to follow it all the time, but maybe just bookmark it, like, I need to check on this. Is it the demographic changes? Is it the economics? Is it the Buckhead stuff? What's the stuff that you're watching and kind of keeping an eye on between now and the election? When folks parachute back in, you can be like, oh, we've been here. Here's your cue card on what you need to talk about.
Well, everyone, don't waste your time on the Buckhead stuff. That was BS from the gate. We're not going to annex off the most expensive properties in the city because someone wants a fence around it. So that's out. Don't worry about that. We still should keep an eye on Senator Warnock. As a matter of fact, he just got sworn in. What's that? Today. He's going to get sworn in today. And Senator Ossoff will be going up 2024. So keep an eye on that. He'll be back to have to get back out on the campaign. I think we should keep an eye on Georgia as a battleground state. It's going to be huge, like you said, in 2024. Georgia might be, once again, be the key state for whomever is running against Joe Biden. I'm assuming Joe Biden's going to run again, running against Joe Biden for the presidency. And if that's the case, we're right back to where we were, being, the key battleground state and being just having all eyes on us. So we should just keep an eye on that, because 2024 will be here in no time. I feel like it's right around the corner already, and we just started 2023.
Yeah, it sure is. Donnell Suggs. Okay, we talked a lot about accountability, the importance of journalism accountability. However, friends have to hold friends accountable. I've got to ask you, it's right in your bio, so I got to bring it up. I'm going to quote you here. You're a devout Met fans, and you believe Fellini's Pizza on Ponce is the best pizzeria in Atlanta. Donnell Suggs, defend your choices.
I'm never going to change that. Fellini's Pizza tastes like New York pizza. And I cannot be more complimentary than that in regards to pizza. I'm a Brooklyn native. I lived there until I went to college, obviously, in Pennsylvania, and then got back home for a couple of years and moved to Atlanta. Fellini's Pizza on Ponce, there's 3 Fellinis, by the way. Fellini's Pizza on Ponce would be exactly, if you flew in today and said, let's get lunch, I would take you to Fellini's without even telling you. That's what I would do to all my friends that come into town. I got to get them a slice of pizza, and it's the best. So I'm not going to, that and Waffle House is the best restaurant in America. Those 2 things I'll never change.
Yeah, I'm with you on Waffle House. I just did a trip to Chicago, so I've been getting pizza war compliments for the last couple of weeks. So
they're serious about their pizza.
We'll put Fellini's on the list. Donnell Suggs, let folks know where they can follow you, what you got going on. Let them know about the Atlanta Voice and where they can keep track of you until we see you and your friends again on Hertel.
Please follow the Atlanta Voice on Twitter at The Atlanta Voice. Also at the website, theatlantavoice.com, and me at Suggs, SUGGS, writer, WRITER on Twitter. We're everywhere, man, in Atlanta. If it's local, if it's national with an Atlanta bent or a Georgia bent, we'll be there. So please follow us. Thank you.
Yep, lots of good food content on his. You know how much we love our food
sure.
because those of us that's got to do this culture and politics things online, that's our sane place. That's why we do all that food stuff. So we'll keep doing that. Sir, I greatly appreciate your time. Looking forward to having you back soon. Donnell Suggs, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Yes, sir.